Imagine a world where the chains are no longer made of iron. They are made of paper, of clauses, of digital entries in a database. We believe we live in the age of ultimate freedom, democracy, human rights, liberalism. We look back with pity at antiquity, at the times of slave markets and whippings, and congratulate ourselves on our moral progress. But what if this is all a gigantic illusion? What if slavery didn't disappear, but was merely perfected? What if the Roman Empire never fell, but simply traded its armor for a bespoke suit? Today, we are going to crack the foundation of our civilization. We are not talking about conspiracy theories. We are talking about cold legal facts. The legal systems of the West, from Europe to the Americas, are built upon Roman law. And Roman law was, is, and remains a law of slaveholders. It is an operating system written not to free human beings, but to manage inventory. And that inventory is you. Welcome to the reality hidden behind the shiny facades of courthouses and parliaments. Today we will dissect terms you use every day without knowing their true, deadly meaning. Citizen, person, republic, liberty. Prepare to see your passport, your employment contract, and even your own name with different eyes. The matrix is real, and it speaks Latin. Let's begin with the economic basis of your existence. You go to work. You get a salary. You pay taxes. You think this is a free exchange. But let's look at the economic definition of slavery. It is brutally simple. A free man is the owner of the fruits of his labor. A slave is not. That is the only dividing line in history that truly matters. Everything else is decoration. Look at your employment contract and the tax code. Does what you produce really belong to you? No. The law only guarantees you the right to a wage, compensation for your life's time. But the product of your labor is immediately expropriated. It belongs to the corporation, or through taxes, a massive portion belongs to the state. In antiquity, the slave received food, shelter, and sometimes a small allowance called the peculium. Today, you get dollars or euros in an account to pay for your own food and shelter. The mechanics are identical. Only the amenities in the slave quarters have improved. Roman law distinguishes precisely between the ownership of the person and the use of their labor. Modern wage labor is nothing more than renting out one's own body to a master. We have replaced the whip with the fear of poverty, and chains with mortgages. The system is designed so brilliantly that the slave believes he is a partner in the contract. But in truth, he is just an asset, a resource to be depreciated as soon as it is no longer profitable. But it goes deeper than money. It is about your status as a living being. Have you ever wondered why legal documents distinguish between a human and a citizen or person? In the Declaration of Human Rights, in the Constitution, this duality appears everywhere. It is no accident. It is the legacy of the Roman caste system. In ancient Rome, there were the patricians, the quirites. They had rights by birth. They were the rulers. On the other side were the plebeians, the masses. They had no natural rights. Their rights were privileges granted by the state, which could be revoked at any time. When you read a constitution today, you see this exact structure. Human rights are theoretically untouchable. But civil rights are conditional. To be a citizen in legal logic means to enter into a contract with the state, submitting yourself to its jurisdiction. The citizen is the modern plebeian. When you apply for an ID or a passport, when you register yourself, you perform an act of capitis diminutio, a diminishing of status. You voluntarily step down from the level of a sovereign human being to the level of an administrative object. In court, it doesn't matter who you are as a man or woman. All that matters is your person, your legal mask. The judge doesn't see the flesh and blood, he sees the number in the registry, and numbers can be disposed of. Let's talk about democracy, the holy word. We vote. We have referendums. But let's look at the etymology. The word referendum has a synonym that is much more honest and comes directly from Rome. Plebiscite, Latin, plebiscitum. It literally means decree of the mob, decree of the plebs. When you participate in a plebiscite, you confirm by your mere participation that you belong to the plebs, to the rightless mass that is only allowed to speak when the patricians ask. It is not an exercise of power. It is the confirmation of your own submission. The elite in ancient Rome laughed at plebiscites. They were valves to let off steam so the slaves wouldn't revolt. Look at modern voting systems. You cast your vote into a ballot box. In many languages, the word used is urn, a vessel for the ashes of the dead. Symbolism is never accidental. By voting, you legitimize the system that owns you. You effectively sign a new contract every 4 years saying, "Yes, I accept that you rule over me. I accept my status as a plebeian." That is not freedom. That is slave management at the highest psychological level. Many of you will say, but Rome fell 1,500 years ago. That's ancient history. That is the devil's greatest trick. Rome never fell. Rome only changed its form. The structure of the empire, the idea Romae, survived every century. Look at the history they hid from you in school. After the fall of the West, Byzantium carried on. Then came the Holy Roman Empire, dominating Europe for 1,000 years. Think of the titles of the rulers. What does Kaiser mean in German? It derives directly from Caesar. What does Tsar mean in Russian? Caesar. Until 1918, until the end of World War I, Europe was ruled by men who openly viewed themselves as successors to the Roman Caesars. This wasn't nostalgia. It was a legal claim to the world. Even today, this line is unbroken. The European Union, NATO, the Western legal community, they all utilize the administrative structure of Rome. Provinces, prefectures, senates, commissioners. The names change, but the geometry of power remains identical. Rome is not a city in Italy. Rome is a virus, a code that says, some are born to rule, the others to serve. And this empire is more alive than ever. Don't believe me? Then open your eyes to the symbols that surround you every day. Symbols do not lie. Words can deceive, but symbols are the language of the subconscious. Walk through Washington, D.C., through Paris, through London. Look at the government buildings, the emblems of power. What do you see? The fasces, the bundle of rods with an axe. In ancient Rome, this was the sign of the lictors, the bodyguards of power. The rods were used to scourge citizens. The axe was used to behead them. It is the ultimate symbol of the state's monopoly on violence. And where do we find it today? In the Oval Office, in the U.S. House of Representatives, flanking the flag, on the armrests of the Lincoln Memorial. The word fascism comes from fasces. But we made the mistake of thinking fascism was just an episode in the 20th century. Number. The symbol of the fasces shows us that the state, every modern state, reserves the right to use violence against its own inventory. It is an open threat carved in stone on the facades of our democracies. We have the axe, they tell us, and you are just the wood. Another symbol, the scales of justice. We romanticize Lady Justice as the symbol of fairness, of weighing truth against lies. But in Roman law, in the jus civile, the scale, Libra, had a different, much colder function. It was the tool of mancipatio. This was the solemn act of transferring property. What was weighed? Bronze, gold, silver. For what? To buy things. Land, cattle, and slaves. The scale is not a symbol of moral justice. It is a symbol of trade, of assessing commercial damages. When you stand in court today, it is almost never about justice in the philosophical sense. It is about compensation, about money, about the value of your labor or the damage to public order. The court is a marketplace, and you are the merchandise. That is why judges wear robes, the toga. In ancient Rome, only Roman citizens, the quirites, were allowed to wear the toga. Slaves and foreigners were forbidden. When the judge puts on the robe, he signals, "I am the Roman. I am the master. You down there are the subjects." The architecture of the courtroom, the elevated bench, the bar you cannot cross, it is all theater to remind you of your place in the hierarchy. Let's analyze the term state or republic. We think of community, of protection. But the Roman term is res publica, literally the public thing or the public affair. That sounds harmless until you compare it with another very well-known Italian phrase, cosa nostra, our thing. Structurally, in Roman law, there is no difference between a state and a criminal organization or a corporation. It is a universitas, a group joining together to manage common resources. And what is the most important resource of a res publica? Human capital, the population, you. The state is a firm, a corporation, and like any company, it wants to maximize profit and minimize costs. You are not a member of this company in the sense of a shareholder who gets dividends. You are the inventory. You are the balance sheet. When the state takes on debt, it pledges your future labor as collateral. Government bonds are essentially bets that you and your children will be good little workers and pay taxes. You are the security for the elite's loans. How do you catch a human in this net? Through voluntarism. Roman law states, slavery cannot be forced, it must be accepted. The slave must consent. Of course, this consent is often a trap. The most important mechanism today is citizenship and the passport. Have you ever tried to renounce your citizenship? To simply say, I am just a human. I belong to no state. It is nearly impossible. The system allows no gaps. You must be registered somewhere. You must belong to an inventory list. States trade citizens with each other like livestock. Extradition treaties, double taxation agreements, these are contracts between owners regarding the management of their herds. The passport is not a freedom to travel. The word comes from passer, to let someone pass. It is a pass card for the state's property to move outside the stable. It does not belong to you. Look inside. It often says, "This passport is the property of the government." You are merely the bearer, the holder. The document marks you as property of the jurisdiction. Without this document, legally, you do not exist. You are a ghost. Caput mortuum. Now it gets even darker. We must talk about language, about the terms you use to identify yourself. We proudly call ourselves Homo sapiens. Science tells us this means the wise man. But Latin is cynical. Let's open the Dictionary of Antiquity, not the school book. Homo comes from humus, earth, soil, dirt. In Roman legal language, a homo was often synonymous with a slave, a being with no legal personality, a pure biological object. The free man was called vir, and sapiens? The verb sapere primarily means to taste, to have flavor, or to smell of something. The meaning to be wise is secondary, metaphorical. If you translate Homo sapiens literally and cynically, it doesn't mean wise man. It means tasty earth or biomass with flavor. For the ruling caste, who saw themselves as divine, or at least as viri, the mass of the population was exactly that: biological substrate, fertilizer, a resource to be consumed. We are the batteries in the matrix, and we pasted the label on ourselves. Think of the biblical scene when Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, presents Jesus to the crowd. He says, "Ecce homo." The church translates this piously as, "Behold the man." But Pilate was a lawyer. He was an administrator. His words were a legal verdict. By pointing at Jesus and saying homo, he declared him a thing, a slave, a rightless entity. He said, "Look, here is a piece of flesh, not a Roman citizen." A Roman citizen could not be scourged without a trial. A homo could. That was the death notice. The crowd understood the signal. He is outlawed. He is just humus. This principle applies to this day. When you stand in court and don't know the right legal formulas, when you identify as a person, you accept the status of homo. You submit to the jurisdiction of maritime law, commercial law, administrative law. You check your sovereignty at the courtroom and step onto the stage as an actor in a role written for you, that of the debtor. Another word that deceives us: emancipation. Women's rights, ending slavery, we all fight for emancipation. We think it means freedom. Wrong. Mancipatio is the grip, the ownership. Ex-mancipatio means to be released from the hand of an owner. But released to where? Not into the wild, not into absolute freedom. In Roman law, the emancipation of a son meant he was released from the authority of the father, patria potestas, to become his own legal person and thus directly taxable by the state. Emancipation is merely the transfer of ownership from the private sector, family, slaveholder, to the public sector, state. When you are emancipated, you no longer belong to your father or your husband. You now belong directly to the state. You are free to work for the state, to pay taxes, to birth soldiers. The chains of the family have fallen. The chains of the Leviathan have snapped shut. We celebrate this as progress, and here is the ultimate linguistic cage, the difference between freedom and liberty. In many languages, these are synonyms, but in English, the language of the modern empire, the distinction is vital. Freedom is the natural state, wild, unregulated, the right of the strong, but also the right of the freeborn. Liberty comes from libertas. That was the freed slave, the sailor on shore leave. Liberty is not real freedom. It is a permission, a privilege that is granted. Civil liberties are freedoms the state gives you, and what the state gives, the state can take away. A passport is liberty. A driver's license is liberty. A business permit is liberty. True freedom requires no licenses, but try fishing, building, or traveling today without a license. You will immediately feel how short the leash of your liberty really is. The Statue of Liberty in New York, she is not a symbol of freedom. She is a symbol of libertas, a Roman goddess who monitors the slave who has been granted leave. We live in an open-air prison, not in freedom. The global system is seamless. There is no man's land anymore. Every square inch of earth belongs to a corporation that calls itself a state. You cannot simply go into the forest and live solely as a sovereign. The forest belongs to the state. The water belongs to the state. If you build a hut, you violate zoning codes. If you hunt, you are a poacher. Why? Because res publica tolerates no competition. You are a resource, and resources are not allowed to manage themselves. Roman law has turned the world into a gigantic grid of property claims. Nothing is sacred. Everything is tradable. Everything has a price, including you, especially you. Your birth certificate is essentially a bond. It is traded on financial markets as security for national debt. You are collateralized from birth. This is not a metaphor. This is the reality of sovereign finance. You don't work to live. You work to pay the interest on debts incurred before you were born. That is the definition of serfdom. Hearing all this, you might feel anger or fear or disbelief. That is normal. That is the pain when the illusion cracks. You ask yourself, what am I then? Knowledge is the first step. You cannot overthrow the system tomorrow. It has 2,000 years of experience in crushing rebellions with violence or with bread and circuses. But you can stop believing the lie. The next time you see your ID, See it for what it is, an inventory card. When you see a government building with pillars and eagles, recognize the Roman temple of power. When you hear the word person, know that it refers to your mask, not your soul. We are not free. We are liberti at best, humus at worst. But the moment you see the bars, you cease to be an unconscious slave. You become a prisoner studying the escape plan. Rome is eternal, they say, but every empire falls when the slaves stop believing in the divinity of their masters. The question is not whether Rome is powerful. The question is, are you ready to stop being a Roman? That was the truth about Roman law. Cold, hard, and without an exit. Or perhaps the realization itself is the exit. Think about that when you go to work tomorrow morning. Who are you really working